Hey guys, it's Amber from the Wild Creative team, and I am back with another masculine card where color is the key. You can add Zentangle, you can add some florals as long as you have more of a masculine color palette. And that's what this card's all about today. I'm choosing my color palette from the Altenew Autumn Festival Watercolor Brush Marker set. There are 3 new colors in this set: Tree Bark, Winter Fog, and Sea Forest, which are perfect for masculine cards. I'm going to be using Winter Fog and Yellow Ochre today. I'm just putting some Winter Fog down on my glass mat. I'm going to spray that with some iridescent ink spray from Altenew. I wanted a touch of shimmer, but I didn't want to overdo it. So to continue to add moisture to this puddle of ink, I'm going to spray on some water with the Distress Sprayer. I want it good and wet so that it moves when I press my watercolor paper down. This is Saunders, and I'm lifting up my glass mat to get it moving a little bit. This is a piece of Saunders Waterford high white hot press watercolor paper. I didn't want too much texture on the paper as I was entangling. So here you can see I've smushed that onto the paper. I'll go ahead and clean my surface, and then I'm gonna also ink smush on some yellow ochre. Before I do that, I just want to dry my paper a little bit. I'm holding the dual speed wow heat tool about 6 inches from the surface of the paper, and that's going to help prevent warping. I also have it on the lowest setting, so there's a little less heat, a little less power with the airflow. Once I have that dry, I've picked out the yellow ochre and mango smoothie. These are also from the Autumn Harvest set. I'm just going to spray that with water. I'm not going to use the iridescent ink spray or add additional of that to the project. And this is the yellow ochre. So I'm going to spray that with water, get it moving by tilting my mat, and then I'll go ahead and smush this down. And I wanted the colors to overlap, but I dried them in between so they wouldn't mix on the paper. I wanted the colors to continue to stay separate, but since they're transparent, you'll see the winter fog underneath the yellow ochre. So if there's too much of one color, I'll go ahead and blot it up with either a paper towel or a baby wipe. I'll kind of tilt the paper so that the colors move. And I'll just keep ink smushing until I get the right amount of color. Then I'll go ahead and dry this so that it's ready to Zentangle. These are the 2 main colors that I used, yellow ochre and winter fog. So I have a Micron Sakura 01 pen here, so it's a fine tip black pen. It does have archival ink in it, it's pigment ink. And that first little open space there looked like a leaf to me. So I'm starting with a pattern called Fleavy. I'll have the names of the Zentangle patterns listed down below, as well as a link to additional information on them on how to draw them. So with this pattern, I started with 2 leaves, and then I started with 1 line, and then I did what you call aura it, which is to outline that line just a few millimeters away. I'm going to go ahead and add another layer of leaves here, 2 layers, and then I'll create another line. So basically what this ends up doing is weaving these leaves into these vertical lines that I'm creating. So it's kind of like a vine texture. And these are cool because you can weave them in and out of your ink smushing. So you can see anytime I come up against some inked area or the ink smushed area, I stop the pattern that I'm drawing and pick it up on the other end of that ink smushing. That's going to create the effect that this pattern that I'm drawing is behind the ink smushing. At the end, I'm going to add some shading so that ink smushing pops up and the drawing recesses into the background. If you're not familiar with Zentangle, I am a certified Zentangle teacher, and I actually started tangling, which is what brought me to card making. A friend of mine asked me to create some Christmas cards for her with Zentangle patterns on them. I'd never made cards before, and so that's how I got into the card making community and learned about card making. So one of the things I really love to do is add both of these mediums together. I love to pretty much, if I'm ever going to Zentangle, it's always on a card now. I never just do a tile. I will have a link to zentangle.com down below if you're interested in more information. And then at the end of this video, I will have a link to a Zentangle playlist on my own channel. So this pattern that I'm adding now is called Crescent Moon. Normally there are more auras or outlines around it, but I stuck with just one to, as in card making and in most design work, I think it's important to have some areas of high contrast along with areas of white space. So you can see that the Fleavy pattern has a lot of white space in it with just outline detail, and the Caviar has large areas of black ink, dark ink to create that contrast and drama to the piece. Otherwise, everything just starts to look the same. So I tried to mix patterns in that way, and Crescent Moon, Caviar are a couple of my go-to patterns to create that extra depth, contrast, and drama. So I'm just adding in some of these, and again, drawing behind, kind of stopping when I get to the ink, and then also drawing some of them behind the other pattern. This is a pattern that's called printemps, and it's basically just a swirl. It starts in the middle and then radiates out. And although you can leave it like this, I like to add some weight to it, so some weight to the line. So I will thicken some of the lines, again, for that same reason, to add higher contrast. So overall, the pattern has a lot of white space, especially if you draw it on a large scale. Adding that weight really helps to draw your eye into it and add a little more drama and interest. I'll also add a little bit of ink in the spaces in between the leaves and the vine that I'm drawing. Same reason, to add some contrast and just fill in those white spaces. If these patterns are new to you and you're just learning this technique, feel free to slow the video down with your settings down below. Hover over the right hand corner of your screen and you'll see the settings button, which looks like a wheel or a cog, and you can change your playback settings there. I'll put on a bit of music for this last little bit of Zentangle. I'm not going to show the entire card being tangled because it's obviously a repetitive pattern, but I'll show you a little bit more before we move on to the heat embossing. Okay, so I'll add a little sprig up here, but I'm not going to show the whole thing. And don't be afraid to leave some white space on your card. And then we'll move on to the sentiment. So I'm going to put the sentiment on the inked area here because I have a nice big open space using the Wow Ultra Slow Drying Clear Embossing Pad. I'll go ahead and ink that up. Now I do ink this up more than once, which is why I have it in my MISTI. Because the watercolor paper is textured, even though it's a hot press, it does have a little bit of texture to it. So I'll go ahead and ink it up twice. And then I'll heat emboss this with the primary Ebony Super Fine Embossing Powder. This powder is great for sentiments, and it heat embosses really quickly. And I actually overheated mine just a touch, so it started to get less smooth, I guess is the best way I can describe it. So you don't want to overheat your embossing powder, so I ended up embossing it twice. Fortunately, I still had my stamp in my mini MISTI. Make sure that your embossing tool is preheated. I usually start from the back and then we'll come to the front. And the primary powders, it's just a single powder in it. They typically heat pretty quickly, so they don't take a lot of time at all. Now I have the Wow Embossing Pen, and I thought it would be fun to add another layer of that yellow ochre in here. So I'm using the Wow Embossing Pen and filling in the center stripe in the vine here, in the Fleavy vine. And I'll emboss this with Earthtone Honey. This is an opaque powder, so when you heat emboss an opaque powder, the color of the powder like straight out of the bottle is exactly what you're going to see when you heat emboss it. This isn't one that changes colors because it's not transparent. It's not going to take on a little bit of the color of the cardstock that's underneath it. So when you're heat embossing it, because it's not a super glossy powder, it can be a little bit more challenging to tell if it's melted. So you need to turn your cardstock in the light a little bit just to be able to tell. And once it doesn't have that grainy appearance, like you can see it's a little grainier, and you'll know once it goes from grainy to smooth that it's melted. So I have my heat tool set to the highest setting, and I start from the back, come around from the front, and you can see that the color stays the same. The opaque powders are cool because you can layer them over other colors and not worry about the color changing. So I really like that. I wanted to add some embellishments, and I thought it would be fun to do that with the embossing pen and some embossing powder. That way the color of the embellishment is the exact same as the embossing powder and that yellow ochre ink that we have on the watercolor paper. Of course, I could have used black dots, but I thought that those would more easily blend into the Zentangle drawing and that the Earthtone Honey dots would really show up well. The last step is adding shading to the Zentangle drawing, and for that I'm using a regular household pencil and then a Tortillon or a paper stump, and that's what you're going to use to blend out the graphite that you add to the paper. I recommend holding both the pencil and the Tortillon almost horizontal to the paper, putting the point towards the area that you're trying to shade, and then drawing it out with the Tortillon. Just add a little bit of graphite, a little goes a long way, and what I shade is the areas that overlap, so any of the Tangle patterns that overlap. And then I also added a little bit of shading to some of the edges of the ink smushing. That will help to pop the ink smushing forward and recess the Zentangle. I also added just a touch of a drop shadow to the heat embossed Earthtone Honey dots that we have there. And here is the finished card. I love all the depth that we have, and even though there are some leaves and vines on here, I still feel like it's a great masculine card due to those earth tone colors. So that earth tone honey is just a perfect color mixed with the yellow ochre and the winter fog. I hope you guys enjoyed this project today, and if you're new to Zentangle, that you'll give it a try. If on the other hand you're new to card making, I hope you give it a try as well. So hopefully bringing these two sets of artists together in one project and kind of opening your eyes to new possibilities. All of the supplies are listed down below, as well as a 10% discount code to shop WOW. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, liking, and ringing that bell so you don't miss any new inspiration. Here's a couple more videos for you before you leave, and I'll see you real soon.